Hey guys, so today I am doing a really quick check-in on my American Presidents Reading Challenge with another Supplementals video. I have really slowed down being able to read actual presidential biographies because I'm really getting to the point where they're just not as easy to find on audiobook, and I have to go to other places to find them, or there's really long holds on some of the ones that I want. But hopefully, eventually I'll get back to that. I have, I think, 2 or 3 right now that I haven't done. And I normally like to, I don't know why 5 seems like a really good number to me, but I like waiting until I have like 5 to do another one. So that's what I'm working on right now. But I did reach 5 new supplemental books, plus like half of one that I'll talk about a little bit at the end because it seems relevant to the last one that I'm going to talk about. Okay. So one of the ones that I'm going to talk about today is Demagogue by Larry Tye. This is a new biography of Joseph McCarthy. While Joseph McCarthy seems kind of tangential to this entire thing, McCarthyism is a really big part of American history. It spans several presidents. The way that several presidents treated McCarthy is its own discussion, or interacted with McCarthy, not treated, like whether or not they supported him or how they fought him. There is, for example, tons of stuff when you read about Eisenhower about like, well, did he actually stand up to him, or was he just, pussyfooting around? It's like a whole thing. So it shows up in a couple of different biographies. But also, this felt really relevant to this challenge because whether you're talking about either this moment of political like cancel culture and hostility in our country, demagogue is also a word that is thrown around a lot when discussing President Trump and whether or not his leadership style was demagoguery. And so it really just felt like a really important moment to be reading about Joseph McCarthy, who is the demagogue that people always reference in these situations. And Larry Tye had written one of the Bobby Kennedy biographies that I read and the one that I most enjoyed. However, I listened to the audiobook of this and it was almost unlistenable. The footnotes in it made it, impossible to hit a flow at any different time. Like the footnotes were so many and they seemed half the time to not be necessary, and they just kept interrupting the flow of the book. And so maybe this wouldn't have been an issue if you were actually reading it, although I assume that if you were actually reading it, you'd get like this much text and then like all of this footnote. I couldn't feel like I couldn't get a toehold in the actual narrative of the biography because there was just like, and sentence, a footnote. 1 sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, footnote. And I'm probably over exaggerating how bad it was, but that was honestly just how it felt. So I almost feel like in a way I can't even talk to you about whether or not the biography itself was good or was bad because I just kept getting really angry about footnote. I also did feel like while this biography could have been really amazing and definitely had some new information in it because Larry Tye was able to access papers and documents from his library and his papers that have not previously either been written about or been available to people, my entire interest in the book was just shot out by how terrible the reading experience was. So if you were interested in this book, I recommend it because it might have new information even if you know more about Joseph McCarthy than I do, which is not hard. But don't listen to the audiobook. It's almost impossible. Maybe if you could listen to the entire audiobook in one shot, I guess. I don't know. I wish I could tell you more about the actual book itself, but I'm honestly not even sure what I learned because I just kept getting interrupted so much. I also read How Did We Get Here? From Teddy Roosevelt to Donald Trump by Robert Dallek. This is a new book by Robert Dallek, who is widely respected as a great presidential historian. He wrote the JFK biography that I read, and I really enjoyed that. I did. And so I thought, oh, well, this is really interesting because it's a cumulative look at many of the modern presidents and how they lead us on a journey of the presidency becoming something up until Donald Trump. Robert Dallek is not a Trump supporter. This book has a very significant lean. What was interesting about that is that I knew that going in because I was reading other people's reviews and they had all mentioned that he had a particular anti-Trump perspective. But this book was really interesting because it felt like he was like, and Teddy Roosevelt was fine, but here are his negative qualities that you can see lining all the way to Donald Trump. And, you know, Wilson was fine, but here are his negative qualities that help pave the way for Trump. And that was a really bizarre take. Also, each president was only one chapter. And while that might be fine for someone who's a more casual historian, at this point, I've read so much that it felt really unfair to handle all of these people in like a chapter a piece, because there were so many like generalizations and then this happened without explaining the context that it felt really bleh. But I thought, okay, you know, this could be fine if in the conclusion, this is really wrapped together really well and Dalek really goes into in the conclusion the point that he's trying to make. But I also just felt like the conclusion also felt flat and was just very summary. So while I was fascinated to see his take as a preeminent presidential historian on the progression of the modern presidents, this just really fell flat for me. And thankfully it was a quick listen and it was a smooth listen. I didn't have any issue with it, but by the end of it I was like, I'm just here to finish this. So book 3 for this is, it took me from the end of January to the end of April to finish this book because I was listening to it in my car and it is astronomically long, but it is The Invisible Bridge, The Fall of Nixon and the Rise of Reagan by Rick Perlstein. Rick Perlstein is a historian known for his books chronicling the rise of conservatism in America. He started with a book on Barry Goldwater, a biography of his life. He wrote a book called Nixonland, which is about Nixon, Richard Nixon. And then he writes Invisible Bridge, which is the fall of Nixon and the rise of Reagan. And he has recently released a new book, which came out last year, called Reaganland, about the first 4 years of the Reagan presidency. So this is literally his mission, is to go from Goldwater forward, which is generally considered the birth of the modern conservative movement or movement conservatism. When I started this book, I was really concerned because it was a very deep rehash of the Watergate crisis. I was like, okay, I've read so much on Richard Nixon. I don't need all this detail. Like, I thought the point was, you know, Nixon falls and Reagan rises. It was really interesting to see back to back, you know, as Nixon is more and more in trouble of his own making, Reagan's reaction, because Reagan was one of the Republicans saying, nah, Nixon did nothing wrong, this is all lies, totally supporting Nixon the whole way. And so this was just taking forever, it felt like, to go forward, and I was like, this is not the part of it that I'm interested in. But once we got past that opening, which for me felt slow, but if you haven't read a bajillion books on Nixon, might not for you, one of the things that Perlstein is really focused on is the cultural moment. So he takes time to talk about the movie The Exorcist and how that was a metaphor for the cultural moment and why it was a success and why it was important. He does the same thing with Jaws. There are things that he does with music of the time. And while it ends up being a very, very slow-paced book, I was so interested after, you know, Nixon was out of power specifically, although this happens also while he is in power, to dive deeper into the moment, the cultural moment for the everyday American trying to live through all of these things. And the focus not necessarily just being on Watergate, but these other things that are happening in America and in the world. And I feel like it just does a really good job placing you in that cultural moment of trying to grapple with a huge change in the American consciousness over this period of time, how the Ford years impacted that, how the Carter years impacted that, The Ford years are dealt with a little bit more than the Carter years. Don't expect too much about Jimmy Carter in this, because that's just mostly like, and then eventually we get Reagan. But it made me want to read or listen to all of his books. The reason that I started with The Invisible Bridge was because I could not get his book on Goldwater or Nixon Land on audiobook. I can only get The Invisible Bridge and Reagan Land. When I'm done with the one I'm listening in my car right now, like that's where I'm headed. I am listening to a biography of Jimmy Carter right now, so it will be like a perfect segue, and I'm really excited about that. So if this is a period of time you're interested in, highly recommend this one. It'll just be slow but worth it. I also read The Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy by Adam Gentleson. This was recommended to me by somebody at work who said, oh, this is a brand new release that really seems to be up your alley. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, ugh. The Senate? I do presidents. But I was reading reviews of it online and people were real hype about this book. So I was like, maybe? So I decided to check it out because we got a copy at the library and I took it home on a whim. This book is so good at conveying information about a very long and complicated Senate history, complicated in the fact that so much of the Senate is tiny rules or bylaws or points of order that if you're not a Senate parliamentarian is hard to understand, because this book does start, doesn't focus so much on the formation of the Senate, although it does talk a bit about James Madison and his vision for it, then goes to focus on James Calhoun, then goes to focus on Lyndon Johnson, and then Mitch McConnell as people who are very instrumental in the way the Senate works. The author of this book was a staffer for Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader for the Democrats the last time around they were in power. So there's also that angle, like a very personal behind the scenes angle for that one. But it does such a good job of bringing you through the history of the Senate, through its biggest major players in terms of how the modern Senate is constructed. Being really engaging, being able to use character instead of information, so it's not like, and then James Calhoun did this, and then LBJ did this. Like, it's really good at giving you a sense of their personality, which is so important, especially in the case of LBJ, and communicating to you the ins and outs of the procedures that have made or broken the Senate to today. So I'm not big into the Senate. There is a strong possibility that people who know more about it might find this book a little bit too brief. It also focuses on the filibuster specifically, I should have said. So if that's not of interest to you, if you already know more about this topic, maybe this isn't the book for you. But if you're looking for a very concise Senate history, specifically, but not focused only on the filibuster and what it means for how our Senate is functioning or not functioning today under both Republicans and Democrats, although he comes out obviously as a staffer for Harry Reid saying, well, I'm a Democrat, so I have this opinion, but I've tried really hard to just lay out the facts. It was so good and so engaging, and this is a book I read. It's really hard for me to read nonfiction, and I read this one, so really enjoyed that. The last one that I finished for the purposes of this review is Rigged: America, Russia, and 100 Years of Electoral Interference by David Scheimer. This was a very weird book. So it's a book in two parts, and part one is the 100 Years of Electoral Interference. And it ends up reading like a laundry list of, and here's when America did things in South America, and here's when America did this, and here's when Russia did this in Ukraine, and and if you have made an interest of studying America as really a covert colonial power specifically, but not only in South America, not that I'm an expert on it, but it's something that I've had of interest. The entire first half is just, and this, and then there was this, and then there was this, and then there was this. And you're like, okay, it's not a bullet point list, but it starts to feel like one. And so I'm just like chugging through the audiobook and I'm just like, I'm not interested in this at all. And then the second half is specifically focused on 2016. And as someone who has never read any of the, say, the court documents from the Mueller investigation or other investigations that actually indicted Russians for what they actually did, I have to say that I was not aware of some of the depth of some of this stuff. Scheimer's point is, we made this a political issue when we should have focused more on the fact that there was interference. We proved it. Russia meddled. And Russia's meddling, while it did, yes, support Trump and Sanders specifically and was against Hillary Clinton and other Republican candidates who weren't Donald Trump, they were after the candidates who caused the most strife. And there's also moments where these actors have just been fomenting strife within like the Black Lives Matter movement, the LGBTQ community, the religious community. Like their entire purpose is destabilization, and that has been lost in some of these other conversations, which are not unimportant. Like if there was collusion, if there was, quid pro quo, that is important. It is, but it is a known fact that Russia interfered in our elections and continues to do so. And so I went from I'm not interested, I'm not interested, I'm not interested, I'm not interested, to, oh, I'm very interested, because Scheimer is also saying, here's how the Obama administration failed to recognize this, here's how the Trump administration failed to recognize this. And unfortunately, Scheimer wrote this book before the 2020 election, because I would be very curious for this book to come out with like an addendum, being like, after it was clear that neither Democrats nor Republicans were taking the steps to actually address this issue, like what happened in 2020. I think that you could honestly just read the second half if you were interested and not lose anything, because the whole point of the first half is just saying, America's done it, Russia's done it, some other people have done it, here's how they've done it. But the key part, which comes out in the second half, is that America has been so focused on overt that we somehow totally missed the social media effect in particular. So just really good. It actually had like quotes and interviews from some really, really high players in both the Obama and Trump administrations, plus had gained access to interviews with people who actually worked on these Russian data farms. It was just really good. It was really well done, and I enjoyed it. And that led me to the book that I'm listening to right now, which will come up in another video, I'm sure, because I haven't finished it, although I'm like super obsessed with it right now. I had to look this one up. Where Law Ends: Inside the Mueller Investigation by Andrew Weissman. And this is a chronicle of the Mueller investigation by one of the chief investigators, who obviously was not Mueller, from the inside, which is really fascinating. Because I also, once I realized how little I knew about actual Russian interference from Rigged, I was really curious to see like an inside look at that as well. So I'm really enjoying it so far, and we'll see what my opinion is when I'm not just a third into it. So those are the books that I have for you guys today. They're getting wildly unspecifically presidential related from various interests, but I'm enjoying them, and I think they count. It's all American politics, and it all circles back on each other. So let me know if you've read any of these, if you're interested in any of these, if you have read other books that you think are of interest to me based on what I'm reading. Let me know, because the scope of this just keeps getting broader and broader, and will probably at some point just encompass like the entire political section. Oh, it's a lot. Okay, I'm done now. This has been longer than I meant it to be. I'm gonna go. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.